The reading we've heard this morning is about Martha and Mary and can be found after the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem when he stopped off in Bethany, a small village on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. It is a familiar story to most of us. Martha is busy in the kitchen preparing a meal for their friend Jesus, and Mary is sitting at his feet listening to him talk. I'm sure we can all relate to both ladies. There are times when we need to be busy, running around doing things, and there are also times when we should just sit and listen to what Jesus is saying to us. I trained as a nurse in Tunbridge Wells over 30 years ago. I then worked in Bury St Edmunds, Suffolk, before we moved to Liverpool. Once here, I started working in the old Sunnybank in Woolton before Marie Curie Hospice was built. I was a staff nurse for 18 years there before taking over as chaplain 13 years ago. My role at the hospice changed dramatically, and it did take a lot of time to adjust. At first, I really missed the nursing and had to rethink my role. Now, however, I feel I've got the best job ever. I want to tell you this morning about what the hospice has been like during this very difficult last year. For several months before the pandemic, I'd been supporting a young lady in her early 40s. She wanted me to help her plan her end-of-life care and her funeral. She had lots of plans to take friends away for weekend breaks and out for meals to make memories with them. Her funeral was to be a celebration of her life, with friends and family all taking part. Sadly, her condition deteriorated at the beginning of lockdown, and she was admitted into the hospice to die. Sadly, none of her end-of-life wishes or funeral plans would be able to be fulfilled, as at that time only 10 people were allowed at a funeral in the crematorium. I remember the day before she died when I was sitting with her, and she told me that she had a feeling that her death was going to be insignificant. When I asked her what she meant by that, she said, "I feel like my death will just be another number read out by Boris Johnson." This prompted me to think about how many other people must be feeling like this, and also to realise that not everyone is dying of COVID. I decided to put together a montage of photos in the hospice reception and invited people to email photos of those they loved who had died. I was overwhelmed by the number of people that sent them in. It became a very fitting memorial to all those who had died. Another lady, who was 60, came into the hospice for her last few days. She had a husband and 4 daughters and had stayed at home with them as long as possible. This was again during the first lockdown, when visiting restrictions were very strict, and only her husband and 1 daughter would be allowed to be with her. At home, she talked this through with her daughters before being admitted, and they'd all agreed which daughter would come. I remember at the time thinking what a difficult decision that must have been for a mum to make. At the beginning of the pandemic, we got these little red hearts made to use at the hospice, and the idea is to give a patient them when they're dying and give their relatives them, especially those that couldn't be in, so that they could feel connected. I gave this lady one and she held it in her hand as she was dying. After she died, her daughter told me that they'd buried her mum with her heart still in her hand and that the rest of them still sleep with theirs under their pillow. I also got people in the community to knit these beautiful daffodils, and they came with a little poem. "This daff is for you, stay safe and keep strong. Hold on, spring is coming, it won't be long. And though time may be hard, full of worry and gloom, remember through tough times some brightness can bloom." I do think people underestimate the power of something like that. The number of people who thanked me for giving them something that had been made for them. Again in lockdown, a young boy rang me. He knew he couldn't come in to see his dad, but he wanted him to know how much he meant to him. I suggested that he wrote his dad a letter and left it on reception. I offered to read it to his dad, which his son agreed to. It was very touching reading it, as his dad was very poorly and I had to keep telling him to wake up so he could hear what I was saying. But then I was able to tell his son that he'd heard every word. His most memorable moment with his dad was in Istanbul, watching that amazing Liverpool comeback. A lot of my work has been thinking outside the box, doing things in such a different way and learning more IT skills. I once celebrated communion with a gentleman whilst his wife joined us on a video call. I met her when he died and she said it was such a cherished memory. There was one family who couldn't see each other due to the restrictions, so I organised an iPad to be used so they could all pray together with their mum before she died. I've kept a constant supply of these holding crosses and these lovely wooden rosary beads in the chapel, and they've disappeared like wildfire. One of the housekeepers told me she keeps her cross in her pocket all day at work, and it gives her some comfort when holding it. I redesigned the chapel during lockdown and made it into an escape room, somewhere for staff to escape to for some quiet space. I kept it supplied with goodies and things like the crosses and mindfulness colouring books and pens. I have found both staff and patients have really appreciated that space and somewhere to go. I've also found that both staff and patients have been much more open to talking to me about their faith or no faith. I think we've all had to face death and our own mortality more than we ever have, and I think sadly that includes our children. There have been lots of questions and thoughts, not only about COVID, but also about our lives and what is important to us. What do we value the most, and who do we value the most, and what difference does our lives make to others? We have streamlined online memorial services several times, using music, words and time for reflection. These services have been watched by large numbers of people with some very touching feedback from relatives and friends, many of who had not been able to attend the funerals of those they loved and knew. Never in the hospice has spiritual care been needed as it has recently. I know it's been recognised by all the senior managers, as never once was I asked not to go into the hospice during lockdown. It was important as both myself and all the staff had to be the family to those who could not have visitors. Even though COVID and lockdown presented me with lots of challenges, it has also opened many doors of opportunity. The reading we heard earlier about Mary and Martha reminds me very much of my journey in nursing. I had to rein myself in from being a nurse, a Martha, running around doing nursing roles, to be someone like Mary, who mostly sits alongside patients or families, listening to their stories that bring with it unresolved issues and pain and questions. These last 18 months has done this, I'm sure, to a lot of us. The normal rush of life has been temporarily put on hold. Some of it I hope won't return. But I hope it has given all of us a chance to be like Mary, time to listen to what Jesus is saying to you. Amen.